Now, the new academic year has become synonymous with student protests at institutions of higher learning. This year has been no different, with classes disrupted over accommodation problems. Institutions have not been able to provide housing to all deserving students, and those relying on NSFAS funding have only access to a few accredited facilities. Let's bring in the South African Union of Students, and Lubabalo Ndzoyiya is the spokesperson there. Lubabalo, thanks very much for joining us. I hope spokesperson is your correct title. But yeah, it's the start of the new year, and yet again we face accommodation challenges for our students.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Greetings to you and greetings to the viewers. The actual title is the President General of South. Initially, the spokesperson is supposed to come, but indeed it's a crisis. We are having a crisis in terms of accommodation. NSFAS has not yet issued a table of allowances. Institutions are finding it difficult to pay landlords. NSFAS has not paid landlords, and the number of landlords are refusing to take students. Some students can't register, and some students are struggling to enter into accommodation, and those institutions don't want to put them into accommodation. So it's a big crisis because it opens a gap for social ills. Students, first years get raped, they get robbed, they get into all sorts of these social ills. So it's quite a crisis. Of course, we did write to the minister, we did write to NSFAS official to say that this is a crisis. They must be able to conclude with the table and forward it to institutions of higher learning.
So there's some issues with students battling the online accommodation platform for NSFAS. That's the one side. And then on the other side is the fact that there aren't enough NSFAS approved accommodation facilities to meet the demand of students. Take us through those two issues, Lubabalo.
Well, first, in the December conference in Durban, where that was confirmed by NSFAS and institutions had agreed that institutions must proceed with accreditation, and NSFAS will proceed with accreditation, so to make sure that there's enough beds for all students. But of course, there are complaints and there's a discussion around the portal that some landlords are struggling to upload their beds, and some students are struggling to find beds on the portal. So it's a concession that must be had. We want to engage the minister on that in making sure that the space is made more effective, the space is made more accessible to students. But the crisis that we have now is that there's a number of landlords that have applied for accreditation, but NSFAS has not sent those accreditors to accredit those beds. And as a result, it creates a shortage of beds. You'll find that in Durban alone, there are a number of buildings. In Johannesburg, there's a number of buildings that have applied for accreditation, but they have not yet been accredited because of the lack of capacity to accredit these beds. So it's a discussion that must be had with the minister. But all we're saying now is that all students that are qualifying and all students that are deserving accommodation must be given accommodation, and then the rest of the discussion will be concluded. What you can't do is to have students who are sleeping in corridors, students who are sleeping outside. That will create a crisis. It's an engagement that we're having with different institutions, we're having with USAF and other relevant stakeholders.
So potentially there actually are enough beds, but it's a case of not being accredited.
Potentially there are beds. There are a number of landlords who come forward to say, we do have beds, we do have buildings, but we want to be accredited. There are a number of landlords who are actually confused. There is some cold war between institutions and NSFAS. Some landlords don't want to be part of the NSFAS portal because institutions are encouraging them not to apply in that portal. So there's that confusion as well in the landlords. Some landlords are accredited by institutions, some landlords are accredited by NSFAS. Now, NSFAS finds it difficult to find how many beds are with institutions, and also institutions can't find how many beds are with NSFAS. So it's a crisis. There's a gap there that must be closed to make sure that all these landlords are taken care of. In terms of numbers, I think landlords are available. Business people are willing to invest. Even government is willing to invest in making sure that they provide these beds.
And I imagine, Lubabalo, that the students themselves are not getting the money for accommodation, right? They don't actually have the physical money in their account so that they can seek out accommodation. That's why the portal exists.
Yes, indeed. This was a discussion, Michelle, that said some students, when they receive the money, they will leave safe accommodation, they'll go live in shacks, They'll go live in places that are not safe because they want to save the money. And some students will stay in a particular res, and at the end of the year, you don't pay the landlord, they leave with the money and all those things. So we then said everyone must be paid directly. Landlords must receive their money directly. Institutions must receive their tuition money directly, and students must receive their money into their own bank account. So that's a discussion that was said so that you are able to facilitate. The discussion that was had now with the service providers of the portal was that there is no need for them to handle the function of paying. NSFAS should be paying landlords directly. Landlords must submit an invoice to the NSFAS. NSFAS, because they are aware of how many students who are staying in that building, they will pay that landlord. But now where there's a crisis is that institutions are running their own process, NSFAS is running its own process. It becomes then a confusion. Potentially, as you said, Michelle, there are enough beds because landlords have been coming forward. Institutions, even provincial governments, have been giving buildings to say that these buildings are available. We as provincial government can turn these buildings into accommodation, given that the NSFAS is willing to work with us, institutions are willing to work with us. So actually here there's a potential of getting a lot of accommodation at a cheaper rate if we're working with government departments and other relevant stakeholders.
Yeah, I mean, it's an awful way to start the new year, especially for first-year students. And there are some terrible stories of students at UWC sleeping for 2 weeks at the university's student centre. There are reports from Cape Peninsula University of Technology. They've cancelled classes and orientation sessions for first-year students there sleeping in common areas. And then at Nelson Mandela University, those who have been accredited these NSFAS accommodation say the conditions in the accommodation is also unbearable. Some of the places are almost unlivable. Are you getting those reports as well?
Yes, Michelle, we're getting those reports while engaging with student leadership in those campuses. Actually, in actual fact, you are to have about 11 institutions that are engaging in protests. UJ is involved, DUT is involved, WUSU is involved, UWC, CPUT, and many other institutions. And if the issue of the allowance table is not sorted by NSFAS, you are likely to see more institutions joining because it does not give clarity. A number of students can't move, can't register, can't get their books because the table for allowances has not been concluded. No one knows how much allowances are to be paid by NSFAS this year. So it's difficult for institutions then to pay landlords because they don't know how much to pay. So we're hoping that, and we're engaging and pushing that NSFAS concludes the table by the end of this week and submit to institutions. We are really aware that there are conditions where accommodation is accredited, and the conditions that students are living in are quite appalling. So we are very much aware of that, and hence we said on the portal there must be a platform where students themselves are able to register a complaint when they see that there's some conditions that are unbearable in their residence. They must take a picture, upload on the portal, and immediately NSFAS must then send those accreditors. And that's why we then said people who are not willing to comply with the standards, their accreditation must be terminated with immediate effect. Because we can't have students living in accommodation that is not safe, students living in accommodation without water, without electricity, and all such conditions. So really, we are all those conditions. And if things are not cleared, you are likely to see a number of institutions joining the protest.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, NSFAS has been, quite frankly, a mess for some time, hasn't it? And there have been promises over and over again, year after year, that it is getting its house in order. We know the organization was placed under administration last year. There have been issues around corruption with private student housing. Again, the issues with the portal that you've just raised as well. In fact, NSFAS still owes some landlords rent for 2024, which might go in some way in explaining the mess we're in now for the new year of 2025.
That's true, Michelle. Look, we all agree that the entity, the institution itself, has been in a crisis for some time. And we see the work that Mr. Lubabalo has been doing in trying to salvage the situation. We see the work that the department is trying to do in making sure that they intervene. We are expecting the board any time from now. We are expecting the employment of the CFO in terms of strengthening the senior leadership at NSFAS. We know that the entity has not been doing very well. And we agree that some landlords are being owed by NSFAS. That's why some landlords are refusing to allow students to enter, because they're saying we can't allow students to enter in 2025 when you have not yet paid us for 2024. There was even a protest in KZN KZN, it was processing the Association of Landlords. Minister had to go engage those landlords and make sure that those payments are facilitated. So there are some attempts made by the leadership to make sure that all these things are cleared. And also as a student leadership, we are trying to push on the ground, and we are looking forward to those landlords to come forward and say, here as Association of Landlords, we are owed so much money, so that we are able to assist in that regard in pushing NSFAS so that students are not affected in this crisis. And indeed, there's quite a lot of discussions that must be had about the entity itself, NSFAS, when it comes to the operations. We know that currently there is a discussion of transport. We know that Santaco wrote to NSFAS saying that the issue of accommodation does affect the routes and the transport issue. So Santaco wants to be part of that. We know that there's quite a lot of things that are taking place. So we must be open to the public. We must be open in discussing these issues, making sure that we bring NSFAS to be a stable entity, because NSFAS is the only entity that has been tasked with the role of free education in South Africa.
Yeah, and in the meantime, while NSFAS gets its house in order, students are being caught in the crossfire. Lubabalo and Ndzoyiya, let me thank you for your time. He joins us from the South African Student Union as we continue to unpack the perennial issues at the National Student Financial Aid Scheme.